Okay, so picture this. You've just achieved something. Maybe it's big, maybe small, it doesn't matter. But you feel, well, genuinely buoyant. Things are clicking into place, right? There's this rare feeling of mental lightness, like you finally have some control and the future looks expansive. You
Yeah.
start making plans, maybe you even feel yourself standing a bit taller. You're ready, ready to really live.
Mm.
But if you're anything like me, or, well, most people I know, you know what happens next. That great feeling, that clicking, it just never seems to last very long. An invisible sort of counterforce just kicks in. Often it's just hours later. Suddenly your confidence collapses, fear surges up, and bam, you snap right back into that familiar anxious holding pattern. It really feels like some unseen hand deliberately yanks the rug out from under your joy. What is that? What's that mechanism? And maybe more importantly, why do we seem to participate in our own misery?
That's exactly what we're diving into today, that abrupt shift, that adverse swing. We're looking for the underlying operation. It's often unconscious. You could almost call it an internal circuit breaker. Its main job seems to be returning you to a kind of preset emotional baseline. And this mechanism is really powerful because it prioritizes emotional homeostasis that drive to maintain a familiar state. Even if, and this is the key part, even if that familiar state is painful anxiety or disappointment.
Okay, let's unpack that. How does this self-sabotage actually show up? Because it seems terrifyingly efficient sometimes. It doesn't even need some big external catastrophe, does it? It feels like the trigger is just internal flourishing, like feeling good is the problem.
hmm
Sometimes it's just a sudden, really acute worry about something that just pops into your head out of nowhere. Or, you catch your reflection and instantly feel repulsed, completely invalidating any good feeling you might have had just a second before.
Exactly. And sometimes the system gets really clever, digging into the past to make sure the present collapses. You might suddenly have this panic-inducing memory, something you said maybe 7.5 years ago, some tiny comment you made, and now your brain catastrophizes it, convinced it was misinterpreted or misconstrued somehow. The whole point of dredging up that memory seems to be just to generate immediate guilt and shame. Doesn't matter if it's even vaguely realistic.
What I find really baffling, though, is what you called the odd impulse. That moment when we're actually doing well, feeling good, and suddenly we get this inexplicable urge to do something foolish, something totally against our normal values. Like maybe send that aggressive email we know we shouldn't, or pick a completely needless, explosive fight with someone we actually care about. Why? Why is that impulse to self-destruct so strong right then?
Well, see, that odd impulse, it isn't really just random foolishness. It's more like the enforcement arm of this internal security system we're talking about. When your emotional altitude gets, let's say, too high for the system's comfort zone, it overrides your conscious desires to enforce that baseline. And the guilt and shame that follow that feeling of being brought back down to earth quite sharply, that is the mechanism. It's administering the necessary penalty. It's not just returning you to neutral, you see. It's actually initiating a kind of punishment cycle to validate the feeling that you were somehow wrong to feel good in the first place.
Wow. Okay, so we're not just talking about bad habits or like having a bad day. And this sounds much deeper. Like these actions are operating under some kind of unwritten constitution. A secret law we never actually agreed to, but it governs our emotional regulation day to day.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. We've internalized what psychologists sometimes call an introject. It's like an unspoken edict based entirely on past experiences that dictates the absolute limits of our emotional space. And if you listen really closely, listen to the rhythm of these deeply ingrained unspoken rules. They start to sound like a set of quite perverse commandments. Commandments for living small. They are effectively the rules we follow when we sabotage ourselves.
And those dictates, they sound something like, okay, let me try. Thou shalt never be exuberant.
Right.
Thou shalt never live life too much to the full. Oh, and a big one. Thou shalt not believe in yourself. And maybe the most pervasive rule of all. Thou shalt worry a lot.
Precisely. And thinking about those rules raises a really crucial question, doesn't it? Especially for anyone listening who recognizes this pattern, where does such a perverse mandate, a mandate against your own thriving, actually originate? Why would our own internal system demand continuous fear and sadness as, like, the price of admission to life? This isn't just an observation. Figuring this out is the key to unlocking the whole mechanism.
Okay, so we need to go deeper. We have to delve into the psychological roots, right? Which probably means revisiting maybe just in our minds, those early life environments, places where our natural flourishing or simple joy was somehow unwelcome, maybe even seen as provocative. That's where the blueprint for this whole thing was likely created. Yeah, I can imagine that. Like, think of a scenario where maybe being too conspicuously happy, just too obviously content as a child. Maybe that really upset a primary caregiver, perhaps a parent who was battling their own deep sense of despair or resignation. Or maybe they felt furious about the deprivations they felt they'd endured. And they just couldn't sort of emotionally tolerate the contrast. They couldn't countenance a child being more content than they were.
And what's really fascinating psychologically is that this conflict doesn't even need to be malicious on the parent's part. It can be an entirely unconscious mirroring of their own suffering. The child's joy just becomes a painful reminder, a reflection of the parent's unmet needs or unhappiness. And so the child, being incredibly perceptive and dependent, quickly learns. They synthesize this powerful psychological association. They grow up linking a low, fearful mood not with failure, but with conditional safety. Sadness, in that context, actually became protective. Think about it. If you're sad, maybe you don't get attacked, verbally or emotionally. You keep out of trouble. Crucially, you don't provoke envy, and you don't highlight someone else's lack or deprivation. So the system learns. Flourishing equals danger. The psychological price, the hidden price for permission to just exist in that environment, was continuous sadness and fear.
Okay, that makes a disturbing amount of sense. But if that's the case, if the ultimate goal is just to return to that safe, low altitude, why does the mechanism rely on creating fresh pain and chaos now? Why doesn't the circuit breaker just, I don't know, induce boredom or maybe just mild distraction? Why do we seem to actively seek out tools to wipe the smile off our own faces, like, deliberately provoking arguments or seeking out those specific websites that confirm we're unattractive or strange or doomed?
That's a really sharp question. It's because the system, the introject, demands a specific kind of penalty. Mild distraction just isn't enough. It isn't sufficient to enforce that deeply rooted thou shalt not thrive edict we talked about. The internalized parent figure, that introject, requires validation that the good mood itself was fundamentally wrong or dangerous. Therefore, when that anxiety flares up signaling you've gone too high, we instinctively initiate the punishment cycle. We create chaos, or we seek out definitive proof of our unworthiness. That painful act, it sort of settles the psychic debt that we unconsciously believe we still owe to that past authority figure.
Wow. So the anxiety itself, the moment we feel that familiar dread creeping in, that's actually a sign of success. It means we've actually stepped outside the authorized zone of suffering, even if just for a moment.
Exactly. Understanding that conflict, that the anxiety is a response to flourishing, that's the path towards freedom. It really is. We have to consciously work to separate the present self, the adult who actually deserves stability and joy from that past, inherited demand for sadness. You have to look inward, honestly, and ask yourself, who might I have upset with my joy way back when? What historical conflicts, what old dynamic is my current self-sabotage still trying to appease or navigate?
And then I guess the work is to reassure that frightened child part within us, that those old rules just don't apply anymore, that we're no longer dependent on the emotional stability or instability of those who raised us. We're grown now.
Yes. And here's the empowering realization you really need to internalize. You just let this sink in. The person or the dynamic that demanded your sadness as a price for their protection or acceptance. The authority figure whose suffering dictated your emotional ceiling. They're no longer an authority over you. That psychological dynamic is history. It's over. So listen, you are allowed to be attractive. You're allowed to be intelligent or gifted or successful. You are absolutely allowed to be within reach of stability and sanity and potency and genuine good spirits. Whatever past beliefs you carry, you are now allowed, you have permission to live without continuous sadness and fear being your default state. And maybe, just maybe, when that self-sabotage impulse fires up next time, try to reframe it. See the anxiety not as a warning that you're failing or doing something wrong, but as a reliable sign, actually, that you are successfully thriving, that you're breaking the old pattern.
That's a powerful shift in perspective. Okay, so as you listening, move forward and start maybe recognizing these patterns in yourself, here's a final thought for you to maybe just mull over. Something that builds on this idea that inherited fear isn't necessary anymore. How many of your current efforts to stay small, that constant low-grade need for apology, that background hum of anxiety, how much of that is simply your subconscious mind continuing to say sorry, apologizing for the potential happiness that the past you, the child you were, simply wasn't allowed to claim? Take that with you. Maybe it's time to start rewriting that secret law.